There is a tree that produces 5 times more calories per acre than corn. It requires no plowing, no fertilizer, no replanting. Once established, it feeds your grandchildren's grandchildren for 500 years. For most of human history, entire civilizations ran on trees like this. Empires rose and fell, but the trees kept producing. Then we cut them down. We did not cut them because they stopped feeding us. We cut them because they fed us too well. A crop that produces forever without annual purchases is not agriculture. It is independence. And independence cannot be taxed, cannot be sold, cannot be controlled. So they called it primitive. They called it inefficient. They rewrote history to make you believe that annual grain saved humanity when the truth is the opposite. The trees saved us first. Then we betrayed them for wheat. This is the story of the forests we burned to build farms that now require $400 billion in annual inputs just to keep from collapsing. Welcome to Nature Lost Vault. Before we open this vault, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these vaults with those who need to remember what we forgot. The archive opens in the mountains of Corsica in 1584. A Genoese governor named Tommasino de Campofragoso issues a decree that would shape the island for centuries. Every landowner must plant 4 trees each year: chestnut, olive, fig, and mulberry. Failure means fines. This is not agriculture policy. It is survival policy. Corsica understood what modern economists have forgotten: trees are wealth that compounds. The chestnut, Castanea sativa, became the island's foundation. They called it l'arbre à pain, the bread tree. A single mature chestnut produces 200 to 300 pounds of nuts every year. For 500 years, without replanting, without inputs. 1 tree feeds a family, 10 trees feed a village. The Corsicans ground chestnuts into flour that's stored for years. They made polenta, bread, porridge, and beer. In the mountains where wheat would not grow, chestnuts thrived. The trees did not care about poor soil. They did not care about slopes too steep for plows. They just produced, century after century. By the 1700s, Corsica's population had doubled. The chestnut forest could carry more humans per acre than any grain field in Europe. And this terrified the administrators. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Modern studies confirm what peasants knew. Chestnut orchards yield 2,500 to 6,000 pounds per acre annually. Convert that to calories and you get 3 to 4 million calories per acre. Corn, the most productive annual grain, yields roughly 15 million calories per acre. But corn requires plowing, planting, fertilizing, spraying, and harvesting every single year. Chestnuts require almost nothing after establishment. When you calculate calories produced per unit of labor, chestnuts win by a factor of 5. 1 person managing a chestnut forest produces more food than 5 people working cornfields. That ratio meant something dangerous. It meant farmers did not need landlords. It meant peasants did not need to buy seed. It meant entire communities could achieve food sovereignty with trees their great-great-grandfathers had planted. This was not unique to Europe. Across the Pacific, a different tree was performing the same miracle. Breadfruit, Artocarpus altilis. The Polynesians had cultivated it for 3,000 years. A single breadfruit tree produces 450 pounds of fruit annually. The fruit is 25% carbohydrate, similar to bread, which is how it got its name. 1 tree feeds a family of 4 for decades. Captain William Bligh understood this in 1787. The British Empire sent him to Tahiti specifically to collect breadfruit trees. The plan was simple: transport them to the Caribbean, feed enslaved people cheaply, reduce the cost of sugar production. The mission failed the first time, the famous mutiny on the Bounty. But Bligh returned in 1791 and he succeeded. He delivered 2,126 breadfruit plants to Jamaica and St. Vincent. The British had weaponized the tree's productivity. If enslaved people could be fed with breadfruit that grew without labor, plantation profits would soar. But something unexpected happened. The enslaved people refused to eat it. They recognized the trap. A food source controlled by plantation owners was not freedom. It was another chain. They continued growing their own provision grounds instead. The breadfruit trees were largely ignored for decades. The empire had tried to use abundance as a tool of control, and it failed. Here is what industrial agriculture does not want you to understand. The most productive food systems in human history were not annual monocultures. They were perennial polycultures, forests. The Mediterranean ran on chestnuts, olives, and figs. Polynesia ran on breadfruit, coconut, and taro. The eastern woodlands of North America ran on the American chestnut Castanea dentata. Before 1900, the American chestnut dominated forests from Maine to Georgia. 4 billion trees. 1 in every 4 hardwoods in the Appalachian Mountains was a chestnut. They called it the perfect tree. The wood was rot-resistant, ideal for buildings, fences, and furniture. The bark provided tannins for leather. The nuts fed humans, pigs, cattle, deer, and bears. A mature American chestnut produced 6,000 nuts annually. Families gathered them by the wagon load each fall. They sold them at train stations for cash income. They fed them to livestock all winter. The trees required nothing in return. In Appalachian communities, the chestnut harvest was as important as any grain crop. More important, grain crops failed during droughts. Chestnuts did not. Grain required labor every year. Chestnuts required only harvesting. Entire regional economies depended on a tree that had been producing since before European contact. Then it died. A fungal blight imported from Asia on Japanese chestnut nursery stock was first detected in New York in 1904. Within 50 years, the blight had killed virtually every American chestnut. 4 billion trees gone. The greatest ecological catastrophe in North American forest history. It was not deliberate, but the response was. Federal and state agencies could have prioritized breeding blight-resistant trees. They could have funded restoration efforts equal to the economic loss. Instead, they promoted annual crops to fill the gap. Corn acreage expanded. Soybean acreage expanded. The United States Department of Agriculture encouraged farmers to plow hillsides that had once been chestnut forests. The subsidies flowed to annuals, not perennials. The infrastructure was built around annual crops, not tree crops. The pattern repeated worldwide. Colonial administrators across Africa and Asia actively discouraged tree-based food systems. They called them primitive. They promoted grain cultivation because grain could be taxed at harvest, measured in warehouses controlled by authorities. Trees producing food for 500 years without permission were administrative nightmares. You cannot easily tax a chestnut tree. You cannot force farmers to buy chestnut seed annually. You cannot create dependency when the trees themselves are the factory. The numbers expose the lie. In 1929, J. Russell Smith published Tree Crops, A Permanent Agriculture. He documented yields that embarrassed annual agriculture. Honey locust trees produced 8,000 pounds of pods per acre. Carob trees yielded 2,500 pounds. Persimmons produced 3,000 pounds. Mulberries, walnuts, pecans, all perennial, all requiring minimal labor once established. Smith calculated that America's hill lands, too steep for sustainable plowing, could produce more food as tree farms than as eroded cornfields. Nobody listened. The book sold poorly. Agricultural colleges continued teaching annual crop production. The USDA continued subsidizing corn and wheat, and the erosion continued. By the 1930s, the Dust Bowl proved Smith correct. Annual monocultures had destroyed the soil. But the response was not to plant trees. The response was more subsidies, more chemicals, more machinery. The infrastructure of annual agriculture had become too profitable to abandon. Seed companies needed annual seed sales. Fertilizer companies needed annual applications. Pesticide companies needed annual spraying. Equipment manufacturers needed annual field operations. The entire economy of industrial agriculture depended on crops that failed to reproduce themselves. Perennial tree crops offered no such profits. Today, the suppression continues through neglect. The United States has 900 million acres of farmland. Fewer than 5 million acres are devoted to tree nuts, almonds, walnuts, and pecans, mostly in California. Meanwhile, corn occupies 90 million acres, and it requires 5.6 billion gallons of herbicides, 12 million tons of nitrogen fertilizer, and billions of dollars in subsidies each year. Breadfruit could feed tropical regions year-round with minimal inputs. Instead, those regions import wheat and rice. Haiti once had extensive breadfruit groves. Deforestation and plantation agriculture destroyed them. Now, Haiti imports 80% of its food. The chestnut is returning. Scientists have spent decades breeding blight-resistant American chestnuts. The American Chestnut Foundation has produced trees that are 94% American chestnut with Asian blight resistance. They are planting them across Appalachia. In Europe, chestnut cultivation is expanding as farmers rediscover its productivity. In France, chestnut flour sells for premium prices. In Italy, the chestnut economy is reviving. The trees remember what we forgot. Breadfruit is experiencing a similar renaissance. The Breadfruit Institute in Hawaii has distributed over 100,000 trees to tropical countries since 2009. They have documented 80 distinct varieties. Modern analysis shows breadfruit contains complete protein, something rare in starchy staples. It has more potassium than bananas and more fiber than brown rice. 1 acre of breadfruit produces 16 to 32 times more fruit than 1 acre of corn produces grain. That ratio should end debates about food security. It should redirect agricultural investment toward perennial systems. Instead, the annual crop industry pretends the numbers do not exist. Climate change makes this calculus urgent. Tree crops sequester carbon. Annual crops release it. Tree crops prevent erosion. Annual crops cause it. Tree crops require minimal irrigation once established. Annual crops consume 70% of global freshwater. Tree crops build soil over centuries. Annual crops deplete it within decades. Every argument for sustainable agriculture is an argument for perennial tree crops. But the seed companies do not sell chestnut seeds annually. The fertilizer companies do not profit from breadfruit forests. The pesticide companies cannot spray trees that resist pests naturally. So the industry maintains the lie. Annual crops are modern, tree crops are primitive. Efficiency is measured in ways that favor inputs, not outputs. The farmer who plants corn is progressive. The farmer who plants chestnuts is backward. The truth is simpler and more dangerous. A family with a mature chestnut grove does not need the agricultural industry. They do not need annual seed purchases. They do not need fertilizer applications. They do not need pesticide regimens. They do not need crop insurance against failures that perennials rarely experience. They have food security for generations without asking permission from anyone. That independence terrifies systems built on dependency. The same productivity that makes tree crops superior makes them threats to industries that profit from annual failure. Corn must be replanted because corn cannot be owned forever. Chestnuts produce for 500 years. That permanence is the problem. We did not abandon tree crops because they failed. We abandoned them because they succeeded too completely. They fed us without requiring our participation in economic systems that extract wealth annually. They built soil instead of destroying it. They sequestered carbon instead of releasing it. They produced 5 times more food per unit of labor than the crops we replaced them with. The forests remember. The chestnuts are being restored. The breadfruit is being replanted. The knowledge survived the burning. Every tree planted today is a vote against the system that profits from annual failure. Every orchard established is food security that lasts beyond our grandchildren. Every forest garden is proof that abundance does not require destruction. They called it primitive because it was permanent. They called it inefficient because it was independent. They called it a problem because it solved too much. The trees are still waiting. They have been waiting since we cut them down. And unlike corn, unlike wheat, unlike soybeans, they will still be producing food when the last industrial farm has blown away. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to Nature Lost Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.